My daughter-in-law forged documents to take the house my husband left me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled and signed the papers they put in front of me. What I did next would unravel everything they thought they'd secured. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because what happened to me could happen to anyone who trusts the wrong people. It started in a quiet office that smelled faintly of leather and printer ink, the kind of place where lives are rearranged with signatures. I sat at the long oak table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the same way I had sat beside my husband, Richard, during every major decision of our 42-year marriage. But this time, his chair was empty, and no one seemed to notice. Across from me, my daughter-in-law, Claire, leaned forward slightly, her manicured fingers resting confidently on a stack of documents. Her nails were painted a soft, expensive shade of beige, the kind that pretended to be subtle while quietly announcing status. Next to her sat my son, Daniel. He wouldn't look at me. Not once. The attorney cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he slid the top document toward me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "this is just a formal transfer confirmation. Everything appears to be in order. Everything appears to be in order." Such a simple sentence. Such a dangerous one. I lowered my eyes to the paper. My name was there. My late husband's name was there. The address of our home, my home, printed neatly at the top. The house Richard and I had bought when Daniel was just 5 years old. The house where I painted the kitchen walls 3 different shades of yellow before settling on the one he said felt like morning sunshine. The house where I held his hand as he took his last breath just 3 weeks ago. And now, it was no longer mine. At least, not on paper. Claire shifted in her seat, her voice soft, almost sweet. "It's just paperwork, Mom," she said. "We're making things easier for you. You don't need to worry about managing such a big property anymore." Mom. She only called me that when someone else was listening. I nodded slowly, as if her words made perfect sense, as if I hadn't already seen the inconsistencies, the dates that didn't line up, the signature that looked almost like Richard's but not quite. 42 years of marriage teaches you things, like the exact way your husband loops the letter R in his name, like the pressure of his pen when he signs something important, like the subtle hesitation he always had before committing ink to paper. That signature on the document? It was too smooth, too confident, too perfect. It wasn't his. But I didn't say a word. The attorney looked at me expectantly. "Do you have any questions, Mrs. Whitmore?" I lifted my gaze, meeting his eyes for just a moment. Then I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "No questions." Daniel shifted beside Claire, finally glancing at me. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Guilt, or maybe just discomfort. It disappeared as quickly as it came. Claire smiled, relieved, victorious. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe that was just the weight of understanding settling into my bones. Because in that moment, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, they believed I was weak, a grieving widow, confused, easily guided. And second, they had already decided my place in this family no longer mattered. I signed the paper, slowly, deliberately. Claire exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing in a way she probably didn't even realize. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The attorney gathered the documents, satisfied. It was done, or at least, that's what they thought. As we stood to leave, Claire reached for her handbag, her movements light, almost celebratory. "See," she said brightly, "that wasn't so hard." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who had been in my home for 15 years, at the woman I had welcomed, defended, even loved at one point. And I smiled. Not the polite smile I'd worn for decades to keep peace in this family, but something quieter, colder, because they had just made one very serious mistake. They thought they had taken everything from me, but what they didn't realize was that I had just let them. And that was the first move I chose to make. 48 hours before I signed those papers, everything was still quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that settles into a house after someone has been there for decades and then suddenly isn't anymore. I woke up that morning just before 6 a.m., out of habit. For 42 years, Richard had always risen early. He would shuffle into the kitchen in his slippers, grind the coffee beans himself, never trusted the pre-ground kind, and hum something off-key while the kettle warmed. That morning, there was no humming, no coffee grinding, no soft footsteps echoing through the hallway. Just silence. I lay in bed for a few extra minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the emptiness. Then I got up anyway, because routine is a stubborn thing. The kitchen still smelled faintly of him. Or maybe that was just my imagination refusing to let go. His favorite mug sat on the second shelf, exactly where he'd left it. I reached for it without thinking, then paused halfway. I didn't move it. Instead, I took down my own cup, the plain white one I'd used for years, and filled it with coffee that didn't taste quite right no matter how carefully I made it. I carried it to the table and sat in my usual chair. His chair remained empty. I didn't look at it. Not at first. But you can only avoid something for so long before it starts to pull at you. So eventually, I did. And the sight of that empty space felt heavier than anything I'd carried at the funeral. The house was large. Too large for one person. That's what Claire had been saying for months, even before Richard passed. You don't need all this space, she would say casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. It's too much for someone your age. Someone your age. I used to let comments like that slide. It was easier that way. Easier to keep the peace. Easier to believe she didn't mean anything by it. But sitting there in the quiet kitchen, I began to replay those conversations differently. Slower. More carefully. As if I were hearing them for the first time. I spent the morning moving through the house without purpose. Straightening things that didn't need straightening. Wiping down already clean counters. Folding blankets that had been folded the night before. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like maintenance. At around 10:30, my phone rang. The sound startled me more than it should have. I let it ring twice before. Picking it up. Hello. There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice I didn't recognize. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes. This is Thomas Green from Harper & Cole Financial Services. I frowned slightly, trying to place the name. I'm sorry, I said. I don't believe I worked with your husband, he interrupted gently. On several property-related matters over the years. That made me sit up straighter. Richard had handled most of those things himself. He used to say he didn't want me burdened with numbers and paperwork. I used to trust that completely. Now, I wasn't so sure what I didn't know. What can I do for you, Mr. Green? I asked. There was another pause. Longer this time, as if he were choosing his words carefully. I was reviewing some recent filings, he said slowly, and your name came up. There's a document that was processed concerning the transfer of ownership of your residence. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Transfer? Yes, ma'am. I glanced around the kitchen, at the walls, the cabinets, the sunlight filtering through the window Richard had insisted we install 20 years ago. I haven't authorized any transfer, I said quietly. Another pause. This one felt heavier. I see, Mr. Green replied. That's exactly why I'm calling. A chill moved through me. Not sharp, not sudden, just slow, deliberate, like something cold settling into place. We arranged to meet that afternoon. He suggested his office. I agreed. After I hung up, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. The house no longer felt just empty. It felt watched, not in a physical sense, but in the way a place begins to feel unfamiliar when you realize something has been happening inside it without your knowledge. At 2 p.m., I walked into Harper & Cole Financial Services. The office was modern, clean, quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than lonely. Mr. Green stood to greet me. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with kind eyes that didn't quite hide his concern. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, shaking my hand. Thank you for coming. Of course. He gestured for me to sit. Then he reached for a folder on his desk. It was thick, organized, prepared. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. I need you to look at this, he said carefully. I lowered my gaze, and there was again that signature, Richard's name, written in a way that almost looked right. Almost. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I didn't feel the panic I might have expected. Instead, I felt something else. Something quieter. Sharper. "Do you recognize this document?" he asked. I studied it for a moment longer. Then I looked up at him. "Yes," I said calmly. "Ido." And in that moment, I understood exactly what had been done. And more importantly, who had done it. Top of form, bottom of form, I didn't react right away. That's something people misunderstand about moments like this. They expect shock, tears, maybe even denial. But the truth is, when something confirms what your instincts have already been whispering, it doesn't explode. It settles, quietly, like a final piece clicking into place. I kept my eyes on the document in front of me. Richard's name, that almost perfect signature. The date. That was the first thing that truly mattered. The date didn't just feel wrong. It was wrong. Richard had been in the hospital that day. I remember it clearly. The sterile smell of the room. The steady beep of the monitor. The way his hand felt in mine, weak but still warm. He hadn't signed anything that day. He could barely hold a pen. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mr. Green said gently, "I need to ask you directly. Did your husband authorize this transfer?" I lifted my gaze slowly. "No," I said. My voice didn't tremble. Not even a little. "He didn't." Mr. Green nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "I was afraid of that," he admitted. He turned another page in the folder, revealing a set of transaction records. Dates, times, signatures, witness lines. Everything looked official. Too official. "Who filed this?" I asked. Mr. Green hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "According to the records," he said carefully, "the paperwork was submitted through a third-party representative acting on behalf of your family." My family. Such a small phrase. Such a heavy one. "Do you have a name?" I asked. He nodded again. Then he turned the page fully toward me. And there it was. Clear. Printed. Unmistakable. Claire Whitmore. I stared at her name for a long moment. Not because I was surprised, but because seeing it written down made it real in a way suspicion never could. 15 years. That's how long she had been part of my life. I remembered the first time I met her. She had worn a soft blue dress, smiled politely, called me Mrs. Whitmore with just the right amount of respect. I had liked her. I had wanted to like her. Because loving your child means trying to love the person they choose, even when something deep down doesn't quite sit right. She had authorization documents attached. Mr. Green continued. Power of attorney paperwork. It appears to grant her the right to act on your husband's behalf. Power of attorney. I almost smiled. Almost. Because that was clever. Dangerously clever. "May I see that?" I asked. He slid another document toward me. I scanned it quickly. The formatting, the language, the signatures, all of it looked convincing to anyone who didn't know better. But I did, because Richard and I had talked about this. Years ago, he had been very clear. If anything ever happens to me, he'd said, "You're the only one who makes decisions. No one else." He had insisted on it, put in writing, with a different attorney. Not this firm, not these documents. "This isn't valid," I said quietly. Mr. Green looked at me. "You're certain?" "Yes." I placed the paper back on the desk with deliberate care. "My husband never signed this. And even if he had," I added, meeting his eyes again, "he would never have given that authority to her." There was again that pause, that look, not just concern now, understanding. Mr. Green leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his tone more serious now, "if what you're saying is correct, then this isn't just a paperwork issue." I held his gaze. "I know." He closed the folder slowly. "This could be considered fraud, possibly multiple counts. Forgery, misrepresentation, unauthorized transfer of assets." Each word landed with precision. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just factual. Fraud, forgery, unauthorized transfer. I let the words settle in the space between us. Not because they frightened me, but because they clarified something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision, a calculated one. "What would you like to do?" Mr. Green asked. A simple question, but not an easy one. I looked down at my hands. They were still, steady. The same hands that had cooked meals for that family, held my son when he was a child, signed birthday cards, holiday gifts, college tuition checks, the same hands that had built a life inside that house. And now, they were being asked to decide what came next. I thought of Daniel, my son, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, the man who couldn't meet my eyes in that office. Did he know? Or had he simply chosen not to ask questions? Sometimes, silence is its own kind of answer. I lifted my head, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself a very small smile. Not out of happiness, but clarity. No, I said calmly. I don't want to do anything. Mr. Green blinked. I'm sorry. I stood up slowly, smoothing my coat, as if we had just finished a perfectly ordinary meeting. I don't want to stop them, I continued. Not yet. He studied me carefully now, trying to understand, try to see what I was seeing. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about what they had taken. I was thinking about what they had just revealed, and how useful that would be. They believe I don't know, I said softly. And that, I picked up my handbag, turning toward the door, is exactly what I need. I didn't go home right away after leaving Mr. Green's office. Instead, I sat in my car for a long time. The engine was off. The world outside moved as it always did. People walking, cars passing, someone laughing in the distance. Normal life, uninterrupted. And yet, mine had just shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. When you discover something like this, your mind doesn't stay in the present. It goes backward, searching, replaying, rewriting every moment that once felt harmless. I drove home slowly, my hands steady on the wheel, my thoughts anything but. Because now, I wasn't just remembering the past. I was reinterpreting it. Claire had always been careful. That was the word I used to admire. Now it felt different, more deliberate, more calculated. I remembered a Sunday afternoon about 6 months ago. Richard had been sitting in his armchair, reading the newspaper, his glasses perched low on his nose the way he always wore them. When he was tired, Claire had walked in with a folder in her hands. "Dad," she'd said sweetly, "I just need your signature on a couple of things. Insurance updates. Nothing important. Nothing important." That's what she called it. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? She was family. But now, I could see it clearly. The way she had stood just a little too close. The way she had turned the pages quickly, not giving him time to read. The way she had guided his hand just slightly as he signed. At the time, I thought she was helping. Now I understood. She was rehearsing. Another memory surfaced. Sharper this time. Richard had been in the hospital. The second week. That was when things started to change. Not with him. With her. Claire had begun asking questions. Small ones. Casual ones. The kind that don't raise suspicion until you line them up side by side. Do you know where all the property documents are kept? Did Richard ever update the ownership structure? Is everything in your name, or still in his? At the time, I answered without thinking. Because I believed she was concerned. Because I believed she cared. Because I believed we were still a family. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment before going inside. The house looked the same. White siding. Blue shutters. The front porch Richard had rebuilt himself one summer when Daniel was in college. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Inside, the air felt still. Heavy in a way it hadn't felt before. I set my purse down on the entry table and walked slowly through the living room. Every object held memory. A photograph. A chair. A lamp. Pieces of a life built over decades. And suddenly, I wasn't just seeing them as memories anymore. I was seeing them as assets. Items on a list. Things someone else had already begun to claim. I stopped in front of the bookshelf in Richard's study. There was a small drawer at the bottom. He used to keep important documents there, until he moved them somewhere safer. At least, that's what he had told me. I knelt down and opened it. Empty. Of course it was. Claire had been in this room. I knew it now. Not because I had seen her, but because of what was missing, and would have been replaced. The files on the desk were arranged too neatly. Perfectly aligned. Richard was never that precise. He liked order, but not perfection. This was someone else's version of order. I stood up slowly, my gaze drifting across the room. And that's when another memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought about in years. Richard and I had been sitting at this very desk, reviewing documents together. He had looked at me, serious in a way he rarely was, and said, "If anything ever feels off, don't ignore it." I had laughed at the time. Told him he worried too much. Told him our family would never give us a reason to doubt them. I closed my eyes briefly, just for a second. Then I opened them again. Clear. Focused. No more doubt. No more benefit of the doubt. No more excuses. Claire hadn't acted suddenly. She had been building toward this. Step by step. Question by question. Signature by signature. And Daniel, whether he knew or not, he had allowed it. That was enough. I walked back into the living room and sat down in Richard's chair. Not mine. His. For the first time since he was gone. The leather creaked softly beneath me. Familiar. Grounding. I rested my hands on the armrests and looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. They thought I was still the same woman. The one who kept the peace. The one who overlooked small things to protect bigger ones. The one who trusted. But they were wrong. Because now, I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at a situation. A pattern. A strategy. And for the first time, I was ready to respond in kind. There's a moment when suspicion stops being a feeling and becomes a fact. I didn't rush. That was the first rule I set for myself. No sudden moves. No emotional reactions. Just observation. Careful. Quiet. Precise. Because people reveal more when they believe they're safe. And Claire believed she was completely safe. That evening, I stayed in the house longer than usual. Normally, after dinner, I would retreat to my room. Give them space. That's what I had trained myself to do over the years. Make myself smaller so everyone else could feel comfortable. But not anymore. Claire was in the kitchen when I walked in. She was standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine untouched beside her. She didn't expect me. I could tell by the way her shoulders stiffened just slightly before she turned around. "Oh," she said, recovering quickly. "You're still up." Still up, as if I were a guest in my own home. "I couldn't sleep," I replied calmly. My voice gave nothing away. No edge. No suspicion. Just neutral. Her eyes studied me for a second longer than necessary. Measuring. Always measuring. Then she smiled. That same polished smile she used in front of strangers. "Do you want some tea?" she asked. I almost said no. But then I realized this was an opportunity. "Yes," I said. "That would be nice." She turned her back to me, reaching for the kettle. And in that small, ordinary movement, I saw it. The shift. The comfort. The confidence of someone who believed the situation was already resolved. "You know," she said lightly, "Daniel and I were talking earlier about the house." "Of course you were." I sat down at the table, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "Oh, yes," she continued, her tone casual. "It's just a lot for you to manage. All this space, all these expenses." There was again the narrative, repeated, refined. "I've managed it for over 40 years, I said gently. She didn't turn around. "Times change," she replied. Simple, dismissive, final. She brought the tea over and set it in front of me. Chamomile. She remembered what I liked. Or maybe she remembered what made me easier to handle. "We're just thinking about what's best for everyone," she added, sitting across from me now. Everyone. Another small word. Another heavy one. I picked up the cup, letting the warmth settle into my hands. "What does best look like?" I asked. She leaned back slightly, crossing her legs. "Confident. Prepared. It means simplifying things," she said. "Transferring responsibilities. Making sure everything is secure." Secure. I almost smiled. "And what responsibilities would those be?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. Then she recovered. "Well, financial oversight, property management, legal matters. There it was, out in the open. "And who would handle those?" I asked. This time, she didn't hesitate. "I would," she said. "Not we. Not Daniel and I. Just her." The room felt very quiet all of a sudden. Not empty. Not heavy. Just clear. Like a fog lifting. I set the cup down carefully. "You've given this a lot of thought," I said. Her smile returned. "I just want to help." "Of course you do." At that moment, Daniel walked in. He froze slightly when he saw us sitting together, as if he had walked into something he didn't want to witness. "Everything okay?" he asked. His voice was cautious. "Careful." "Of course," Claire answered quickly, before I could speak. We were just talking about the future. The future. Another word that used to mean something warm. Now, it sounded like a transaction. Daniel nodded slowly, but he still wouldn't look at me. Not directly. Not fully. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because whether he had signed those papers, or simply stood by while they were signed, the result was the same. He had chosen a side. I stood up then, smoothing my hands over the table. I think I'll go to bed, I said quietly. Claire smiled. Of course. Get some rest. I walked out of the kitchen without another word. My steps were steady, unhurried, controlled. Behind me, I could hear them speaking in low voices. Too low to make out the words. But I didn't need to hear them. Not anymore. Because the truth was no longer hidden. It was sitting right there in the open. In her confidence. In his silence. In a way they spoke about my life, as if it already belonged to them. And as I reached the top of the stairs, I paused. Just for a moment. My hand resting lightly on the railing Richard had installed himself. They thought this was over. They thought the papers were enough. They thought I had already lost. But what they didn't understand was that I had just seen the full picture for the first time. And once you see everything clearly, you stop reacting. You start planning. I didn't confront them the next morning. I didn't slam doors. I didn't demand explanations. Because confrontation is for people who still believe the other side will tell the truth. Instead, I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. The same way I had done for decades. The same way I had done for a family that no longer existed in the way I once believed. It did. Claire walked into the kitchen first. Perfectly composed. As always. Her hair neatly styled. Her expression calm. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have thought everything was normal. Peaceful even. Good morning, she said lightly. I glanced up and gave her a small nod. Good morning. No tensión. No acusación. Nothing to suggest that I knew exactly what she had done. That was the point. Daniel came in a few minutes later. He hesitated when he saw me at the stove. Just for a second. Then he forced a smile. Morning, Mom. Mom. The word sounded unfamiliar coming from him now. Not wrong. Just distant. Sit, I said gently. Breakfast is ready. They exchanged a quick look. Subtle, but not subtle enough. They sat. I served them both. Placed the plates in front of them like I had done thousands of times before. Every movement steady. Deliberate. You don't have to do all this, Claire said after a moment. Her tone carried something new now. Not concern. Control. I want to. I replied simply. She studied me again. Looking for something. A crack. A reaction. A sign that I had changed. But I hadn't. At least, not in the way she expected. Because while they were watching me, I was watching them. Daniel avoided eye contact. Kept his focus on his plate. Eating faster than usual. Like he wanted the moment to end quickly. Claire, on the other hand, was calm. Relaxed. She took small bites. Sipped her coffee slowly. Completely at ease. That told me everything. Daniel felt something. Guilt. Uncertainty. Maybe even regret. But Claire? She felt nothing. Except certainty. And certainty makes people careless. After breakfast, I cleaned the dishes. As usual, neither of them offered to help. They never did. But today, I noticed it differently. Not as a disappointment, but as information. At around 10 a.m., Claire left the house. Running errands, she said casually. I nodded. Of course you are. Daniel stayed behind. Working from home. Sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. Typing. Pausing. Typing again. I walked past him slowly. Not stopping. Not speaking. But I saw the screen. Just for a second. Email. Subject line. Property transfer confirmation. Final review. So it wasn't over. Not completely. Good. That meant I still had time. I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door behind me. Then I sat down at the edge of the bed. Richard sighed. Not mine. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel it. Everything. The loss. The betrayal. The quiet understanding that the life I had built had already been dismantled behind my back. But only for a moment. Then I stood up, walked to the closet, and reached for the small box on the top shelf. Inside were documents. Original documents. The ones Richard had insisted on keeping separate. Just in case, he had said. I opened the box slowly. Carefully. There it was. The original deed. The original signatures. The real ones. Proof. I ran my fingers lightly over the paper. Not out of sentiment, but recognition. This was where the truth lived. Not in their version, not in their paperwork, but here. I closed the box and placed it back exactly where it had been. No changes, no signs, nothing to alert them. Then I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at a name I hadn't called in years. Margaret Ellison, Richard's attorney, the one he trusted, the one who had handled everything that actually mattered. My finger hovered over the call button for a second. Then I pressed it. The line rang once, twice, and then she answered. Margaret, I said calmly. This is Eleanor Whitmore. A pause, recognition, then warmth. Eleanor, I was so sorry to hear about Richard. Thank you, I replied softly. Then I let the silence sit for just a moment. Before I added, I need your help. Because while Claire believed she had already won, she had made one critical mistake. She forged documents, and I still had the real ones. Top of form, bottom of form. Margaret didn't ask many questions on the phone. That's how I knew I had called the right person. People who understand the truth. Don't rush it. Come see me, she said simply. Bring everything you have. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual. Before Claire came downstairs. Before Daniel opened his laptop. Before the performance of normalcy could begin again. I dressed carefully. Not in black. Not in anything that suggested grief. But in something structured. Composed. A navy coat. Low heels. My hair pulled back neatly. Because this wasn't a day for mourning. This was a day for clarity. Margaret's office hadn't changed much over the years. Same building. Same quiet hallway. Same understated brass plaque on the door. Ellison and Grant. Attorneys at law. When I stepped inside, the receptionist looked up and smiled politely. Mrs. Whitmore? I nodded. She's expecting you. Margaret stood when I entered her office. She was older now, a few more lines around her eyes. But her posture, her presence, unchanged. Eleanor, she said, stepping forward to take my hands. I'm so sorry. For everything? I asked quietly. She held my gaze for a moment longer than expected. Then she nodded. Yes, she said. For everything. We sat. I placed the box on her desk, opened it, and turned it toward her. She didn't speak right away. She just looked, carefully, page by page, signature by signature. Minutes passed in silence. The kind of silence that carries weight, not uncertainty. Finally, she leaned back slightly and exhaled. These are the originals, she said. Yes. And the property was never transferred out of your name? No, she nodded once. Slow. Certain. Then what they filed, she said, choosing her words carefully, is not just invalid. She closed the folder gently. It's criminal. There was again. That word. Clear. Final. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Margaret studied me now, not just as a client, but as someone trying to understand what I intended to do next. You've already been approached with these documents, haven't you? She asked. Yes. And you signed something? I nodded. She didn't panic, didn't raise her voice, just leaned forward slightly. Good, she said. I tilted my head slightly. Good. Yes, she repeated calmly. Because if they believe the transfer is complete, they'll move forward. I understood immediately. They'll expose themselves, I said. Margaret's lips curved just slightly. Not a smile. Recognition. Exactly. She turned back to the documents. Tapped her finger lightly against the original deed. This is your foundation, she said. Everything else they've built is on top of a lie. And lies, I said quietly, collapse. She met my eyes again. And this time, there was no hesitation. Yes, she said. They do. We spent the next hour going through everything. Every document. Every inconsistency. Every point where their version of events didn't align with reality. Dates that didn't match. Witnesses who couldn't have been present. Signatures that didn't hold under scrutiny. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. And patterns are what make cases strong. When we finished, Margaret closed the folder and folded her hands. You have options, she said. We can file immediately. Freeze everything. Press charges. I shook my head. Not yet. She watched me carefully. Waiting. I want them to continue, I said. I want to see how far they go. There was a pause. Then, a slow nod. You want them confident, she said. Yes. Comfortable. Yes. She leaned back in her chair again. Then we do this your way, she said. I stood up, closed the box, and picked it up. Eleanor, she added before I reached the door. I turned back. When this is over, she hesitated. Just slightly. It won't just be about the house. I held her gaze. I know, I said, because this was never just about property. It was about something much harder to recover. Trust. And as I stepped out of her office, I realized something else. They thought they were taking control of my life. But what they had really done was give me a reason to take it back. Top of form, bottom of form, I didn't change anything when I got home. That was the most important part. No saben disicens. No visibles chiefs. No sign that I had just spent the morning building a case against them. Claire was in the living room when I walked in. Laptop open. Papers spread neatly across the coffee table. My papers. She looked up and smiled. That same controlled, effortless smile. Oh good, you're back, she said. I was just organizing some things. Organizing. Another harmless word. Another lie wrapped in politeness. I glanced at the documents briefly. Not long enough to seem interested, but long enough to recognize the layout. The formatting. The same structure as the forged paperwork. You've been busy, I said lightly. She tilted her head, studying me again. Always studying. Just trying to keep everything in order, she replied. I nodded once and walked past her, as if none of it mattered, as if I hadn't just confirmed exactly what she was doing. Behind me, I could feel it. That pause. That moment where she tried to read me. But I gave her nothing. That evening, the pressure began to shift. Subtle at first, then clearer. Dinner was quieter than usual. Not tense, not confrontational, just calculated. Claire spoke, more than she normally did, filling the space, controlling the tone. Daniel and I have been thinking, she said casually as she set her fork down. We should probably start making some updates around the house. Updates. I looked up slowly. Updates. Yes, she continued. Repairs, maybe some renovations. It's been a while since anything's been refreshed. Refreshed. Daniel shifted in his seat. He didn't speak, but he didn't object either. Of course, I said calmly. Claire's eyes flickered, just for a second. She had expected resistance, or at least hesitation. Instead, I agreed, and that made her more comfortable, more confident. Great, she said, smiling. I'll start getting estimates. I nodded again, as if she were doing me a favor, because the more she moved forward, the more she committed, and the more she committed, the harder the fall would be. Later that night, I passed by the study. The door was slightly open, light spilling into the hallway. Voices inside. Low. Urgent. I didn't stop. I didn't lean in. I didn't make a sound. But I heard enough. We just need to finalize it, Claire was saying. Daniel's voice followed. Lower. Uncertain. Are you sure it's already done? She cut him off. Sharp. Controlled. A pause. Don't start second-guessing now. Silence after that. Heavy. Final. I kept walking. Up the stairs. Step by step. So that was it. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the details. But enough. Enough to question. Enough to hesitate. And still, not enough to stop her. I reached my room and closed the door behind me. Gently. Quietly. Then I sat down in the chair by the window. The same chair where Richard used to read in the evenings. The house was no longer just a place of memories. It was a stage, and they were performing, planning, expanding their control, renovations, paperwork, finalizing things. They weren't just taking the house. They were settling into it, claiming it, as if I were already gone. I folded my hands in my lap and stared out into the dark yard. They thought time was on their side. They thought the longer this went on, the stronger their position would become. But they didn't understand something critical. Time doesn't strengthen a lie. It multiplies the evidence against it. Every document Claire touched, every decision she made, every step she took to secure what she believed was hers, was another thread, and I was letting her weave them all together. Because when the time came, I wouldn't just pull one thread. I would pull all of them, and everything she had built would come apart in her hands. 3 days later, Claire made her move. It came disguised as something ordinary, a family discussion. We should all sit down and go over everything together, she said that morning, her tone calm, organized, almost professional. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. All. I looked at her over my coffee cup and nodded. That sounds like a good idea. Daniel glanced at me, surprised. He was still expecting resistance, still waiting for me to push back, to question, to make things difficult. But I didn't, because this was exactly what I had been waiting for. The meeting was set for that afternoon, in the dining room, the same room where birthdays had been celebrated, where holidays had been shared, where laughter used to come easily. Now, it was something else entirely. When I walked in, everything was already prepared. Papers neatly stacked, pens aligned, even water glasses placed with careful precision. Claire was standing at the head of the table, not Daniel. That told me everything. You're right on time, she said, offering a polite smile. Of course I was. I took my seat, not at the head, not at the side, but in my usual place, the place I had always sat. Daniel sat beside her, not across from me, beside her, aligned. Claire began speaking almost immediately, confident, prepared. I've put together a plan, she said, sliding a document toward me. A way to streamline everything moving forward. Streamline. I lowered my eyes to the paper. Not reading. Not yet. Just observing. This includes finalizing the property transfer, she continued, and ensuring all legal responsibilities are properly assigned. Finalizing. Legal responsibilities. She was building her language carefully, making everything sound legitimate, structured, clean. And what would that involve? I asked calmly. She smiled again, as if she had been waiting for that question. It's very simple, she said. We just need your signature on a few updated documents. After that, everything will be fully secured. There it was, the final step. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, his fingers tapping once against the table before going still. He knew, maybe, not everything, but enough to feel the weight of the moment. Claire placed the pen in front of me, carefully, deliberately. Once this is signed, she said softly, there won't be anything left to worry about. I looked at the pen, then at her. She was calm, composed, certain, because in her mind, this was already done. I reached for the document, pulled it closer, and began to read. Slowly, line by line. I could feel her watching me, waiting, measuring how long it would take. But I didn't rush, because this wasn't about understanding the document. I already knew what it said. This was about something else. Time. Letting the moment stretch. Letting her sit in her own confidence. Letting Daniel feel the silence pressing in around him. Finally, I set the paper down and picked up the pen. Claire's shoulders relaxed. Just slightly. There it was. Relief. Victory. Is everything clear? She asked. I met her eyes and smiled. Yes, I said. Everything is perfectly clear. I signed the document. Slow, steady, deliberate. The ink settled onto the paper. Final, binding, or at least, that's what they believed. Claire exhaled softly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. It was done. She gathered the papers quickly, too quickly, as if she didn't want to give me time to change my mind. We'll have everything processed right away, she said. Of course you will. I stood up, smoothing my hands over the table. Good, I said calmly. And then I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear them speaking again. Quieter now, relieved. They thought they had secured everything. The house, the control, the future. But what they didn't realize was that this meeting, this signature, this moment, was never about giving them what they wanted. It was about giving them exactly what they needed to expose themselves completely. The call came 2 days later. Claire answered it. Of course she did. I was in the living room, sitting quietly with a book I hadn't turned a page of in over an hour. Watching, waiting. Her phone rang from the kitchen. I heard her heels against the tile as she walked quickly to answer it. Hello. Her voice was light, confident. A pause. Yes, this is she. Another pause. Longer this time. Something changed. Not in what she said, but in how she said it. I see, she replied slowly. Silence again. Then, no, that's not possible. There it was. The first crack. I didn't move. Didn't look toward the kitchen. Just listened. There must be some mistake, she continued, her voice tightening just slightly. We have signed documentation. Everything was processed. Another pause. Her tone dropped. Lower now. Controlled, but strained. Who? She asked. And I smiled, because I knew exactly what name she was about to hear. Margaret Ellison. The silence that followed was longer than the others. Heavy. Then, I understand, Claire said. But she didn't. Not yet. She ended the call. For a moment, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Then her footsteps came faster. Sharper. She appeared in the doorway of the living room. And for the first time, her composure wasn't perfect. What did you do? She asked. Not if. Now what's going on? What did you do? I closed my book. Slowly. Placed it on the table beside me. Then I looked up at her. I answered a phone call, I said calmly. Her eyes narrowed. That's not what I meant. I know, I replied. Daniel appeared behind her then, drawn in by the tension. His expression uncertain. Worried. Claire, he asked. She didn't look at him. Didn't take her eyes off me. They're saying the transfer isn't valid, she said. Her voice was sharper now. Faster. They're saying there's conflicting documentation. Daniel's face went pale. Conflicting, he repeated. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just stood. There is, I said. Claire took a step forward. Who did you talk to? I held her gaze. Someone who knows the difference between a real signature and a forgery. The word landed exactly where it needed to. Forgery. Daniel looked between us. Confusion turning into something else. Something heavier. Claire, he said quietly. But she shook her head. Quick. Defensive. No, she snapped. This is ridiculous. Everything was done properly. Was it? I asked. My voice didn't rise. Didn't sharpen. It didn't need to. The truth was already in the room. You filed documents, I continued, using a signature that doesn't belong to your husband. My husband? She repeated, her voice tightening. Yes, I said softly. My husband. The silence that followed was different. No longer controlled. No longer calculated. Unstable. Daniel took a step back, his eyes dropping to the floor, then lifting again. Claire's that. True. She didn't answer right away. And that was answer enough. I walked past the both, toward the doorway. This isn't over, Claire said suddenly. I paused, turned slightly. No, I said. You're right. Then I met her eyes one last time. It's just beginning. Because what she didn't understand yet was that this wasn't about stopping her anymore. It was about showing everyone exactly what she had done and making sure there was no way out of it. Top of form, bottom of form, the house felt different after that. Not quieter, not louder, just exposed. There's something about truth. Once it's spoken out loud, it doesn't go back into hiding. It lingers in the walls, in the silence between words, in a way people avoid looking at each other. Daniel didn't say much that evening. He stayed in the dining room long after Claire had disappeared upstairs, sitting at the table, staring at nothing. I passed by once, didn't stop, didn't speak, because whatever he needed to understand, he had to arrive at it on his own. Claire, on the other hand, didn't stay quiet for long. The next morning, she came into the kitchen with a different energy. Still controlled, still composed, but sharper now, defensive. We need to talk, she said. I continued pouring my coffee. Unhurried. About what? I asked. Her jaw tightened slightly. You know exactly what. I turned, cup in hand, and met her eyes. Then say it, I replied. A beat of silence. Then, you've involved another attorney, she said. Not a question. An accusation. Yes, I said. Her eyes narrowed. That was unnecessary. I almost smiled. Forgery usually requires clarification, I said calmly. The word hit again. Harder this time. Daniel walked in just then. Stopped when he heard it. Claire, he said, his voice lower now. Not uncertain anymore. Careful. She turned to him quickly. Don't start, she said. I'm not starting anything, he replied. I'm trying to understand. Understand. Another small word. Another turning point. Everything was handled, Claire said firmly. We followed the process. Did we? He asked. She froze. Just for a second. Because that was the first time he had said we. Not stood beside her, but questioned alongside her. I watched it happen in real time. That shift. Small but irreversible. She's making it sound like something it's not. Claire continued, her voice tightening. I'm not making it sound like anything, I said quietly. I'm just stating what is. And what is that? She shot back. I set my cup down. Carefully. You submitted documents, I said, that do not match the original records. Daniel's eyes moved between us. Slower now. More deliberate. You told me everything was verified, he said to her. It was, she insisted. By who? That question lingered. Because for the first time, there wasn't an easy answer. Claire looked at him, then at me, then back again. And in that moment, her control slipped. Why are you doing this? She demanded suddenly. I tilted my head slightly. Doing what? Turning this into something bigger than it is, she said. I held her gaze. I'm not turning it into anything, I replied. You already did that. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was heavy. Final. Daniel stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair. I need to see everything, he said. Claire shook her head immediately. No, that's not necessary. It is, he interrupted. That was the moment. The moment everything shifted. Because for the first time, he wasn't following her lead. He was asking his own questions. And questions are dangerous, especially when the answers aren't clean. I picked up my cup again, took a small sip, calm, unmoved. Because this part, this unraveling, it didn't require my involvement anymore. They were doing it themselves. And as I turned to leave the kitchen, I paused just long enough to say one thing. There's a meeting tomorrow, I said quietly. Both of them looked at me. With my attorney, I added. Claire's expression tightened. Daniel didn't speak, but I saw it. That realization, that understanding, that whatever this had been, whatever they thought they had secured, was no longer in their control. And as I walked away, I knew something else. They weren't afraid of losing the house. Not yet. They were afraid of something else. The truth and the price. It was about to demand. Top of form, bottom of form, the meeting was set for 10 a.m. Claire arrived first. Of course she did. Dressed sharply. Composed. Prepared. Daniel came in a few minutes later. Slower. Less certain. And I arrived last. Not by accident. Because sometimes, timing says more than words ever could. Margaret was already seated at the head of the table. When we walked in, files arranged neatly in front of her. Everything in place. Control. Clarity. Structure. The opposite of what Claire had built. Good morning, Margaret said evenly. Claire nodded politely. Daniel murmured something under his breath. I took my seat. Same as always. Calm. Still. Margaret didn't waste time. Let's begin, she said. She opened the folder. Turned it toward them. Original documents. The real ones. This, she said, tapping lightly against the paper, is the legally binding deed to the property in question. Claire leaned forward, her eyes scanning quickly. Too quickly. Daniel followed, more slowly. Reading. Actually reading. And this, Margaret continued, sliding another set of papers forward, is what was recently filed. Side by side. Truth and imitation. Even to an untrained eye. The differences were there. Dates. Signatures. Witnesses. Small details. But undeniable ones. There are multiple inconsistencies, Margaret said calmly. Enough to invalidate the transfer entirely. Claire straightened, her voice sharp. That's your interpretation. Margaret looked at her, unmoved. No, she replied. It's the law. Silence fell across the room. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his face pale, his hands still. Claire, he said quietly. But she didn't respond. Didn't look at him, because for the first time, there was nothing left to say. Margaret closed the folder gently. We can proceed in several ways, she said. Civil action, criminal charges, immediate asset reversal. Each option placed carefully on the table. Each one heavier than the last. Claire finally spoke again. But her voice was different now. Not controlled. Not confident. Cornered. This is being blown out of proportion, she said. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see control. I didn't see calculation. I saw something else. Fear. I folded my hands in my lap, the same way I had done at the very beginning. I'm not interested in dragging this out, I said calmly. Margaret glanced at me, waiting. I want the property restored, I continued. Immediately, Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. And after that, I paused, just for a moment. I want distance. Daniel looked at me then, really looked. Mom, he started. I raised my hand slightly, not to silence him, but to stop what didn't need to be said. This isn't about anger, I said quietly. And it wasn't. It's about clarity. The room went still again, because clarity doesn't argue, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. It simply is. Margaret nodded once. We'll proceed accordingly, she said. And just like that, it was over. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with something far more final. Decision. I stood up, smoothed my coat, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just silence, the kind that follows truth. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, clearer. I paused for a moment at the edge of the sidewalk. Looking ahead, 42 years of my life had been built in that house. And for a moment, I thought losing it would break me. But it didn't, because I hadn't lost anything. I had simply seen everything for what it truly was. And sometimes, that's the only thing you need to take your life back.